I went down to the Pyrrhus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Ariston. I wanted to say a prayer to the goddess, and I was curious to see how they would manage the festival, since they were holding it for the first time. I thought the procession of local residents was a fine one, and that the one conducted by the Thracians was no less outstanding. After we said our prayer and seen the procession, we started back towards Athens. Polemarchus saw us from a distance as we were setting off for home, and told a slave to run and ask us to wait for him. The slave caught hold of my cloak from behind. Polemarchus wants you to wait, he said. I turned around and asked where Polemarchus was. He's coming up behind you, he said. Please wait for him. And Glaucon replied, All right, we will. Just then Polemarchus caught up with us. Adeimantus, Glaucon's brother, was with him, and so were Niceratus, the son of Nicias, and some of the others, all of whom were apparently on their way from the procession. Polemarchus said, It looks to me, Socrates, as if you two are starting off for Athens. It looks the way it is, then, I said. Do you see how many we are? He said. I do. Well, you must either prove stronger than we are, or you will have to stay here. Isn't there another alternative? Namely, that we persuade you to let us go. But could you persuade us if we won't listen? Certainly not, Glaucon said. Well, we won't listen. You better make up your mind to that. Don't you know, Adeimantus said, that there is to be a torch race on horseback for the goddess tonight? On horseback, I said. That's something new. Are they going to race on horseback and hand the torches on relays, or what? In relays, Polemarchus said, and then there will be an all-night festival that will be well worth seeing. After dinner, we will go out to look at it. We'll be joined there by many of the young men, and we'll talk. So don't go, stay. It seems, Glaucon said, that we'll have to stay. If you think so, I said, then we must. So we went to Polemarchus' house, and there we found Lysias and Euthydemus, brothers of Polemarchus, Thrasymachus of Chalcedon, Carmentides of Pannonia, Cleitophon, the son of Aristonomus. Polemarchus' father, Cephalus, was also there, and I thought he looked quite old. I hadn't seen him for some time. He was sitting on a sort of cushioned chair with a wreath on his head, and he had been offering a sacrifice in the courtyard. There was a circle of chairs, and we sat down by him. As soon as he saw me, Cephalus welcomed me and said, Socrates, you don't come down to the Pyrrhus to see us as often as you should. If it were still easy for me to walk to town, you wouldn't have to come here, we'd come to you. But as it is, you ought to come here more often, for you should know that as the physical pleasures wither away, my desire for conversation and its pleasures grows. So do as I say, stay with these young men now, but come regularly to see us, just as you would to friends or relatives. Indeed, Cephalus, I replied, I enjoy talking with the very old, for we should ask them, as we might ask those who have traveled a road that we will too probably have to follow, what kind of road it is, whether rough and difficult or smooth and easy. I'm gladly found out from you what you think about this, just as you have reached the point in life the poets call the threshold of old age. Is it a difficult time? What is your report about it? By God, Socrates, I'll tell you exactly what I think. A number of us, who are more or less the same age, often get together in accordance with the old saying. When we meet, the majority complain about the lost pleasures they remember from their youth, those of sex, drinking parties, feasts, and other things that go along with them. And they get angry as if they had been deprived of important things and had lived well then, but are now hardly living at all. Some others moan about the abuse heaped on older people by their relatives, and because of this, they repeat over and over that old age is the cause of many evils. But I don't think they blame the real cause, Socrates, for if old age were really the cause, I should have suffered in the same way, and so should everyone else of my age. But as it is, I've met some who don't feel like that in the least. Indeed, I was once present when someone asked the poet Sophocles, How are you as far as sex goes, Sophocles? Can you still make love with a woman? Quiet, man, the poet replied. I am very glad to have escaped from all that, like a slave who has escaped from a savage and tyrannical master. I thought at the time that he was right, and I still do, for old age brings peace and freedom from all such things. When the appetites relax and cease to importune us, everything Sophocles said comes to pass, and we escape from many mad masters. In these matters, and in those concerning relatives, the real cause isn't old age, Socrates, but the way people live. If they are moderate and contented, old age too is only moderately onerous. If they aren't, both old age and youth are hard to bear. I admired him for saying that, and I wanted him to tell me more, so I urged him on. When you say things like that, Cephalus, I suppose that the majority of people don't agree. They think that you bear old age more easily, not because of the way you live, but because you're wealthy. For the wealthy, they say, have many consolations. That's true, they don't agree. And there is something in what they say, though not as much as they think. Themistocles' retort is relevant here. When someone from Seriphus insulted him by saying that his high reputation was due to his city and not to himself, he replied that he had been a Seraphin. He wouldn't be famous, neither would he be the other, even if he had been an Athenian. The same applies to those who aren't rich and find old age hard to bear. A good person wouldn't easily bear old age if he were poor, but a bad one wouldn't be at peace with himself even if he were wealthy. Did you inherit most of your wealth, Cephalus? I asked, or did you make it for yourself? What I did make for myself, Socrates, you ask? As a moneymaker, I'm in a sort of mean between my grandfather and my father. My grandfather and namesake inherited about the same amount of wealth as I possess, but multiplied it many times. My father, Lysanias, however, diminished the amount to even less than I have now. As for me, I'm satisfied to leave my sons here not less but a little more than I inherited. The reason I ask is that you don't seem to love money too much, and those who haven't made their own money are usually like you. But those who have made it for themselves are twice as fond of it as those who haven't. Just as poets love their poems and fathers love their children, so those who have made their own money don't care about it just because it's useful, as other people do, but because it's something they've made themselves. This makes them poor company, for they haven't had a good word to say about anything except money. That's true. It certainly is, but tell me something else. What's the greatest good you've received from being very wealthy? What I have to say probably won't persuade most people. But you know, Socrates, when someone thinks that his end is near, he becomes frightened and concerned about things he didn't fear before. It's then that the stories were told about Hades, about how people who've been unjust here must pay the penalty there. Stories he used to make fun of, twist his soul this way and that for fear they're true. And whether because the weakness of old age, or because he is now closer to what happens in Hades and has a clearer view of it, or whatever it is, he is filled with foreboding and fear, and he examines himself to see whether he has been unjust to anyone. If he finds many injustices in his life, he awakes from sleep in terror, as children do, and lives in anticipation of bad things to come. But someone who knows that he hasn't been unjust has sweet good hope as his constant companion, a nurse to his old age, as Pindar says, for he puts it charmingly. Socrates, when he says that when someone lives a just and pious life, such hope is in his heart, nurse and companion to his age. Horse, hope, captain, and the ever twisting, minds of mortal men. How wonderfully he puts that. It's in this connection that wealth is most valuable, I'd say. Not for every man, but for a decent and orderly one. Wealth can do a lot to save us from having to cheat or deceive someone against our will, and from having to depart for that place in fear because we owe sacrifice to a god or money to a person. It has many other uses, but, benefit for being, I'd say that this is how it is most useful to a man of any understanding. A fine sentiment, Cephalus, but speaking of this thing itself, namely justice, are we to say unconditionally that it is speaking the truth and paying whatever debts one has incurred? Or is it doing these things sometimes just, sometimes unjust? I mean, this thing, for example. Everyone would surely agree that a sane man lends weapons to a friend and asks them for them back when he is out of his mind. The friend shouldn't return them, and wouldn't be acting justly if he did. Nor should anyone be willing to tell the whole truth to someone who is out of his mind. That's true. Then the definition of justice isn't speaking the truth and repaying what one has borrowed. It certainly is, Socrates, said Polemarchus, interrupting if indeed we're to trust Simonides at all. Well then, Cephalus said, I'll hand over the argument to you, as I have to look after the sacrifice. So, Polemarchus said, am I to be your heir in everything? You certainly are, Cephalus said, laughing, and he went off to the sacrifice. Then tell us, heir to the argument, I said, just what Simonides started about justice that you consider correct. He stated that it is just to give each what is owed to him, and it's a fine saying in my view. Well, now, it isn't easy to doubt Simonides, for he's a wise and godlike man. But what exactly does that mean? Perhaps you know, Polymarchus, but I don't understand him. Clearly, he doesn't mean what we said a moment ago, that it is just to give back whatever a person has lent to you, even if he's out of his mind when he asks for it. And yet, what has he lent to you is surely something that's owed to him, isn't it? Yes. But it is absolutely not to be given to him when he's out of his mind. That's true. Then it seems that Simonides must have something different when he says that to return what is owed is just. Something different, indeed, by God. He means that friends owe it to their friends to do good for them, never harm. I follow you. Someone doesn't give a lender back what he's owed by giving him gold, if doing so would be harmful, and both he and the lender are friends. Isn't that what you think Simonides meant? It is. But what about this? Should one also give one's enemies whatever is owed to them? By all means, one should give them what is owed to them. And in my view, what enemies owe to each other is appropriately and precisely something bad. It seems that Simonides was speaking in riddles, just like a poet, when he said what justice is, for he thought it just to give to each what is appropriate to him, and this is what he called giving him what is owed to him. What else do you think he meant? Then what do you think he'd answer if someone asked him, Simonides, which of the things that are owed or that are appropriate for someone or something to do the craft we call medicine give, and to whom or what does it give them? It's clear that it gives medicine, food, and drink to bodies. And what owed or appropriate things does the craft we call cooking give, and to whom or what does it give them? It gives seasonings to food. Good. Now, what does the craft we call justice give, and to whom or what does it give? If we were to follow the previous answers, Socrates, it gives benefits to friends and does harm to enemies. Simonides, then, means that to treat friends well and enemies badly is justice? I believe so. And who is most capable of treating friends well and enemies badly in matters of disease and health? A doctor. And who can do best in a storm at sea? A ship's captain. What about the just person? In what actions and what work is he most capable of benefiting friends and harming enemies? In wars and alliances, I suppose. All right. Now, when people aren't sick, Polymarchus, a doctor is useless to them? True. And so is a ship's captain to those who aren't sailing? Yes. And to people who aren't at war, a just man is useless? No, I don't think that at all. Justice is also useful in peacetime, then. It is. And so is farming, isn't it? Yes. For getting produce? Yes. And shoemaking as well? Yes. For getting shoes, I think you'd say. Certainly. Well, then, what is justice useful for getting and using in peacetime? Contracts, Socrates. And by contracts, you mean partnerships, or what? I mean partnerships. Is someone a good and useful player in a game of checkers because he's just or because he's a checkers player? Because he's a checkers player. And in laying bricks and stones, is a just person a better and more useful partner than a builder? Not at all. In what kind of partnership, then, is a just person a better partner than a builder or a liar player? In the way that a liar player is better than a just person at hitting the right notes. In money matters, I think. Except, perhaps, Polymarchus, in using money, for whenever one needs to buy a horse jointly, I think a horse breeder is a more useful partner, isn't he? Apparently. And when one needs to buy a boat, it's a boat builder or a ship's captain? Probably. In what joint use of silver or gold, then, is a just person more useful partner than the others? When it must be deposited for safekeeping, Socrates. You mean whenever there is no need to use them but only to keep them? That's right. Then it is when money isn't being used that justice is useful for it. I'm afraid so. And whenever one needs to keep a pruning knife safe but not to use it, justice is useful both in partnerships and for the individual. When you need to use it, however, it is skill at vine pruning that's useful, apparently. You'll agree, then, that when one needs to keep a shield or a lyre safe and not to use them, justice is a useful thing. But when you need to use them, it is soldiery or musicianship that's useful, necessarily. And so too, with everything else, justice is useless when they are in use, but useful when they aren't? It looks that way. In that case, justice isn't worth much, since it is only useful for useless things. But let's look into the following point. Isn't the person most able to land a blow, whether in boxing or any other kind of fight, also most able to guard against it? Certainly. And the one who is most able to guard against disease is the most able to produce it unnoticed. So it seems to me, anyway. And the one who is the best guardian of an army is the very one who can steal the enemy's plans and dispositions. Certainly. Whenever someone is a clever guardian, then, he is also a clever thief. Probably so. If a just person is clever at guarding money, therefore, he must also be clever at stealing it. According to our argument, at any rate. A just person has turned out, then, it seems, to be a kind of thief. Maybe you learn this from Homer. He's fond of Autolycus, and the maternal grandfather of Odysseus, whom he describes as better than everyone at lying and stealing. According to you, Homer and Simonides, then, justice seems to be some sort of craft of stealing, one that benefits friends and harms enemies. Isn't that what you meant? No, by God, it isn't. I don't know anymore what I did mean, but I still believe that to benefit one's friends and harms one's enemies is justice. Speaking of friends, do you mean that those a person believes to be good and useful to him are those who are actually good and useful, even if he doesn't think they are, and similarly with enemies? Probably. One loves those one considers good and useful, and hates those one considers bad and harmful. But surely people often make mistakes about this, believing many people to be good and useful when they aren't, and making the opposite mistake about enemies. They do indeed. And then good people are their enemies and bad ones their friends? That's right. And so it's just to benefit bad people and harm good ones, apparently. But good people are just and able to do no wrong. True. Then according to your account, it's just to do bad things to those who do no injustice. No, that's not just at all, Socrates. My account must be a bad one. It's just then, is it, to harm unjust people and benefit just ones? That's obviously a more attractive view than the other one, anyway. Then it follows, Polemarchus, that it is just for the many who are mistaken in their judgment to harm their friends who are bad and benefit their enemies who are good. And we arrive at a conclusion opposite to what Simonides meant. That certainly follows, but let's change our definition, for it seems that we didn't define friends and enemies correctly. How did we define them, Polemarchus? We said that a friend is someone who is believed to be useful. And how are we to change that now? Someone who is both believed to be useful and is useful is a friend. Someone who is believed to be useful but isn't is believed to be a friend but isn't. And the same for the enemy. According to this account, then, a good person will be a friend and a bad one an enemy. Yes. So you want us to add something to what we said before about justice, and when we said that it is just to treat friends well and enemies badly, you want us to add to this that it is just to treat well a friend who is good and harm to an enemy who is bad? Right. That seems fine to me. Is it, then, the role of a just man to harm anyone? Certainly. He must harm those who are bad and enemies. Do horses become better or worse when they are harmed? Worse. With respect to the virtue that dogs good or one that makes horses good. The one that makes horses good. And when dogs are harmed, they become worse in the virtue that makes dogs good, not horses. Necessarily. Then won't we say the same about human beings too? That when they are harmed, they become worse in human virtue? Indeed. But isn't justice human virtue? Yes, certainly. Then people who are harmed must become more unjust. So it seems. Can musicians make people unmusical through music? They cannot. Or horsemen make people unhorsemanlike through horsemanship? No. Well then, can those who are just make people unjust through justice? In a word, can those who are good make people bad through virtue? They cannot. Isn't it the function of heat to cool things, but of its opposite? Yes. Nor the function of dryness to make things wet, but of its opposite. Indeed. Nor the function of goodness to harm, but of its opposite. Apparently. And a just person is good indeed. Then Polymarchus, isn't it a function of a just person to harm a friend or anyone else? Rather, it is the function of his opposite, an unjust person. In my view, that's completely true, Socrates. If anyone tells us then that it is just to give each what he's owed and understands by this that a just man should harm his enemies and benefit his friends, he isn't wise to say it, since what he says isn't true, for it has become clear to us that it is never just to harm anyone. I agree. You and I shall fight as partners then against anyone who tells us that Simonides, Bias, Pittacus, or any of our other wise and blessed happy men say this. I, at any rate, am willing to be your partner in the battle. Do you know whom I think the saying belongs to, that it is just to benefit friends and enemies? Who? I think it belongs to Periander, or Perdiccas, or Xerxes, or Ismenus of Corinth, or some other wealthy man who believes himself to have great power. That's absolutely true. All right, since it is apparent that justice and the just aren't what people say they are, what else could they be? While we were speaking, Thrasymachus had tried many times to take over the discussion, but was restrained by those sitting near him, who wanted to hear our argument to the end. When we paused after I'd just said, however, he couldn't keep quiet any longer. He coiled himself up like a wild beast about to spring, and he hurled himself at us as if to tear us to pieces. Polymarchus and I were frightened and flustered as he roared into our midst. What nonsense have you two been talking, Socrates? Why do you act like idiots by giving way to one another? If you truly want to know what justice is, don't ask questions and then refute the answers simply to satisfy your competitiveness or love of honor. You know very well that it is easier to ask questions than answer them. Give an answer yourself and tell us what you say that just is. And don't tell me what that it's the right, the beneficial, the profitable, the gameful, or the advantageous, but tell me clearly and exactly what you mean, for I won't accept such nonsense from you. His words startled me, and I looked at him, and I was afraid. And I think that if I hadn't seen him before he stared at me, I'd have been dumbstruck. But as it was, I happened to look at him, and just as our discussion began to exasperate him, so I was able to answer, and trembling a little, I said, "Don't be too hard on us, Thrasymachus, for if Polymarchus and I made an error in our investigation, you should know that we did so unwillingly. If we were searching for gold, we'd never willingly give way to each other, if by doing so we'd destroy our chance of finding it. So don't think that in searching for justice, a thing more valuable than even a large quantity of gold, we mindlessly give way to another or be less than completely serious about finding it. You surely mustn't think that, but rather, as I do, that we're incapable of finding it. Hence, it's surely far more appropriate for us to be pitied by you clever people than to be given rough treatment." When he heard that, he gave a loud sarcastic laugh. "By Heracles," he said, "that's just Socrates' unusual irony. I knew when I had said to these people earlier that you'd be unwilling to answer the question, and that if someone questioned you, you'd be ironical and do anything rather than give an answer. That's because you're a clever fellow, Thrasymachus. You knew very well that if you ask someone how much 12 is, and you warn him by saying, 'Don't tell me, man, that 12 is twice 6, or 3 times 4, or 6 times 2, or 4 times 3, for I won't accept such nonsense,' then you'll see clearly, I think, no one could answer a question framed like that. And if he said to you, 'What are you saying, Thrasymachus? Am I not to give any of the answers you mentioned, not even if 12 happens to be one of those things?' I'm amazed. Do you want me to say something other than the truth, or do you mean something else? What answer would you give him? Well, do you think the two cases are alike? Why shouldn't they be alike? But even if they aren't alike, yet seem to the person you ask, do you think him any less likely to give the answer that seems right to him, whether we forbid him to or not? Isn't that what you're going to do, given one of the forbidden answers? I wouldn't be surprised, provided it is the one that seems right to me after I've investigated the matter. What if I show you a different answer about justice than all these, and a better one? What would you deserve then? What else than the appropriate penalty for one who doesn't know, namely, to learn from what one does who does know? Therefore, that's what I deserve. You amuse me, but in addition to learning, you must pay a fine. I will as soon as I have some money. He has some already, said Glaucon. If it's a matter of money, speak, Thrasymachus, for we'll all contribute for Socrates. I know, he said, so that Socrates can carry on as usual. He gives no answer himself, and then, when someone else does give one, he takes up the argument and refutes it. How can someone give an answer, I said, when he doesn't know it and doesn't claim to know it, and when an eminent man forbids him to express the opinion he has? It's much more appropriate for you to answer, since you say you know and can tell us. So do it as a favor to me, and don't begrudge your teaching to Glaucon and the others. While I was saying this, Glaucon and the others begged him to speak. It was obvious that Thrasymachus thought he had a fine answer, and that he wanted to give their admiration by giving it. But he pretended that he wanted to indulge his victory by forcing me to answer. However, he agreed in the end and then said, "There you have Socrates' wisdom. He himself isn't willing to teach, but he goes around learning from others and isn't even grateful to them." When you say that I learn from others, you are right, Thrasymachus. But when you say that I'm not grateful, that isn't true. I show what gratitude I can, but since I have no money, I can give only praise. But just how enthusiastically I give it when someone seems to speak to me well, you'll know as soon as you've answered, for I think that you will speak well. Listen then, I say that justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. Well, why don't you praise me? But then you do anything to avoid having to do that. I must first understand you, for I don't yet know what you mean. The advantage of the stronger, you say, is just. What do you mean, Thrasymachus? Surely you don't mean something like this. Polydamas, the pancratist, is stronger than we are. It is his advantage to eat beef to build up his physical strength. Therefore, this food is also advantageous and just for us who are weaker than he is? You disgust me, Socrates. Your trick is to hold an argument at the point where you can do it the most harm. Not at all, but clearly what you mean. Don't you know that some cities are ruled by a tyranny, some by a democracy, and some by an aristocracy? Of course. And in each city, this element is stronger, namely, the ruler. Certainly. And each makes laws to its own advantage. Democracy makes democratic laws, tyranny makes tyrannical laws, and so with the others. And they declare what they have made and what is to their own advantage to be just for their subjects. And they punish anyone who goes against this as lawless and unjust. This, then, is what I say justice is. The same in all cities, the advantage of the established rule. Since the established rule is surely stronger, anyone who reasons correctly will conclude that the just is the same everywhere, namely, the advantage of the stronger. Now I see what you mean. Whether it's true or not, I'll try to find out. But you yourself have answered that the just is the advantageous, Thrasymachus, whereas you forbade me that answer to me. True, you've added, of the stronger to it. And I suppose you think that's an insignificant addition. It isn't clear yet whether it's significant, but it is clear that we must investigate to see whether or not it's true. I agree that the just is some kind of advantage, but you add that it's of the stronger. I don't know about that. We'll have to look into it. Go ahead and look. We will. Tell me, don't you also say that it is just to obey the rulers? I do. Are all the rulers in the cities infallible, or are they liable to error? No doubt they are likely liable to error. When they undertake to make laws, therefore, they make some correctly, others incorrectly. I suppose so. And if a law is correct if it prescribes what it is to the ruler's own advantage, and incorrect if it prescribes what is to their disadvantage, is that what you mean? It is. And whatever laws they make must be obeyed by their subjects, and this is justice. Of course. Then according to your account, it is just to do not only what is to the advantage of the stronger, but also the opposite, what is not to their advantage. What are you saying? The same as you, but let's examine it more fully. Haven't we agreed that in order to give orders to their subjects, the rulers are sometimes in error as to what is best for themselves, and yet that is just for their subjects to do whatever their rulers order? Haven't we agreed to that much? I think so. Then you must also think that you have agreed that it is just to do what is disadvantageous to those rulers and those who are stronger, whenever they intentionally order what is bad for themselves. But you also say that it is just for others to obey the orders they give. You're terribly clever, Thrasymachus, but doesn't it necessarily follow that it is just to do the opposite of what you said, since the weaker are then ordered to do what is disadvantageous to the stronger? By God, Socrates, said Polemarchus, that's quite clear. If you are to be witness anyway, said Cleitophon, interrupting. Who needs a witness? Polemarchus replied. Thrasymachus himself agrees that the rulers sometimes order what is bad for themselves, and that it is just for others to do it. That, Polemarchus, is because Thrasymachus maintained that it is just to obey the orders of rulers. He also maintained, Cleitophon, that the advantage of the stronger is just. And having maintained both principles, he went on to agree that the stronger gives orders to those who are weaker than he is, in other words, to his subjects, that are disadvantages to the stronger himself. From these agreements, it follows that what it is to the advantage of the stronger is no more just than what is not to his advantage. But, Cleitophon responded, he said that the advantage of the stronger is what the stronger believes to his advantage. That is what their weaker must do, and that is what he maintained the just to be. That isn't what he said, Polemarchus replied. It makes no difference, Polemarchus. If Thrasymachus wants to put it that way, let's accept it. Tell me, Thrasymachus, is this what you wanted to say the just is? Namely, what the stronger believes to be his advantage, whether it is in fact advantage or not? Is that what we are to say you mean? Not at all. Do you think I called someone who is in error stronger at the moment he errs? I did think that was what you meant when you agreed that the rulers aren't infallible but are liable to error. That's because you are a false witness in argument, Socrates. When someone makes an error in the treatment of patients, do you call him a doctor in that very regard? Or when someone makes an error in accounting, do you call him an accountant in regard to that very error in calculation? I think that we express ourselves in words that take a literary, do that as a doctor is an error, or an accountant, or a grammarian. But each of these, insofar as he is what we call him, never errs, so that according to the precise account, and you are a stickler for precise accounts, no craftsman ever errs. It's when his knowledge fails him that he makes an error, and in regard to that he is no craftsman. No craftsman, expert, or ruler makes an error at the moment when he is ruling, even though everyone will say that a physician or a ruler makes errors. It's in this loose way that you must also take the answer I gave earlier. But the most precise answer is this. A ruler, insofar as he is a ruler, never makes errors and unerringly decrees what is best for himself, and that his subject must do. Thus, as I said from the first, it is just to do what is an advantage of the stronger. All right, Thrasymachus, so you think I'm a false witness? You certainly are. And you think that I asked questions in order to harm you in the argument. I know it very well, but it won't do you any good. You'll never be able to trick me, so you can't harm me that way, and without trickery, you'll never be able to overpower me in argument. I wouldn't so much as try, Thrasymachus, but in order to prevent this sort of thing from happening again, define clearly whether it is the ruler and stronger in the ordinary sense, or in the precise sense, whose advantage you said is just for the weaker to promote as the advantage of the stronger. I mean the ruler in the most precise sense. Now practice your harm doing and false witnessing on that if you can. I ask no concessions from you, but you certainly won't be able to. Do you think that I'm crazy enough to shave a lion or to bear false account witness against Thrasymachus? You certainly tried just now, thought you were a loser at that too. Enough of this. Tell me, is a doctor, in the precise sense whom you mentioned before, a moneymaker or someone who treats the sick? Tell me about the one who is really a doctor. He's the one who treats the sick. And what about a ship's captain? Is he a captain in the precise sense of a ruler of sailors or a sailor? A ruler of sailors. We shouldn't, I think, take into account the fact that he sails in a ship, and he shouldn't be called a sailor for that reason, for it isn't because of his sailing that he is called a ship's captain, but because of his craft and his rule over sailors. That's true. And if there's something advantageous to each of these, that is, to bodies and to sailors, certainly. And aren't the respective crafts by nature set over them to seek and provide what is to their advantage? They are. And is there any advantage for each of the crafts themselves to be as complete or perfect as possible? What are you asking? This. If you ask me whether our bodies are sufficient in themselves or whether they need something else, I'd answer, they certainly have needs. And because of this, because our bodies are deficient rather than self-sufficient, the craft of medicine has now been discovered. The craft of medicine was developed to provide what is advantageous for a body. Do you think that I'm right in saying this or not? You are right. Now, is medicine deficient? Does a craft heed some further virtue, as the eyes are in need of sight, and the ears are of hearing, so that another craft is needed to seek and provide what is advantageous to them? Does a craft itself have some similar deficiency, so that each craft needs another to seek out what is to its advantage? And does the craft that does the seeking need still another, and so on without end? Or does each seek out what is to his own advantage by itself? Or does it need either itself nor another craft to seek out what is advantageous to it, because of its own deficiencies? Or is that there is no deficiency of error in any craft? that it isn't appropriate for any craft to seek what is to the advantage of anything except that of which it is the craft, and that, since it is itself correct, is either without fault or impurity, as long as it is wholly and precisely the craft that it is. Consider this with the preciseness of language you mentioned. Is it so or not? It appears to be so. Medicine doesn't seek its own advantage then, but that of the body. Yes. And horse breeding doesn't seek its own advantage, but that of the horses. Indeed, no other craft seeks its own advantage, for it has no further needs, but the advantage of that which it is the craft. Apparently so. Now surely, Thrasymachus, the crafts rule over and are stronger than the things of which they are crafts. Very reluctantly, he conceded this as well. No kind of knowledge seeks or orders what is advantageous to itself then, but what is advantageous to the weaker when subject to it. He tried to fight this conclusion, but he conceded it in the end. And after that he said, surely, then, no doctor, insofar as he is a doctor, seeks or orders what is advantageous to himself, but what is advantageous to his patient. We agree that a doctor in the precise sense is a ruler of bodies, not a money-maker. Wasn't that agreed? Yes. And so a ship's captain in the precise sense is a ruler of sailors, not a sailor. That's what we agreed. Doesn't it follow that a ship's captain or ruler won't seek and order what is advantageous to himself, but what is advantageous to a sailor? He certainly agreed. So then, Thrasymachus, no one in a position of rule, insofar as he a ruler, seeks or orders what is advantageous to himself, but what is advantageous to his subjects, the ones of whom he is himself the craftsman. It is to his subjects and what is advantageous and proper to them that he looks, and everything he says and does, he says and does for them. When we reached this point in the argument, it was clear to all that his account of justice had turned into opposite. Instead of answering, Thrasymachus said, "Tell me, Socrates, do you still have a wet nurse?" "What's this? Hadn't you better answer my question, rather than asking me such things?" "Because she's letting you run around with a snotty nose, and doesn't wipe it when she needs to. Why, for all she cares, you don't even know about sheep and shepherds." "Just what it is I don't know. You think that shepherds and cowherds seek the good of their sheep and cattle and fatten them and take care of them, looking to something other than their master's good and their own? Moreover, you believe that rulers in cities, true rulers that is, think about their subjects differently than one does about sheep, and that night and day they think of something besides their own advantage. You are so far from understanding about justice and what's just, about injustice and what's unjust, that you don't realize that justice is really the good of another, the advantage of the stronger and the ruler, and harmful to the one who obeys and serves. Injustice is in the opposite. It rules the truly simple and just, and those it rules, and does what is to the advantage of the other and stronger, and they make the ones they serve happy, but themselves not at all. You must look at it as follows, my simple Socrates. A just man always gets less than an unjust one. First, in their contracts with one another, you'll never find when the partnership ends that a just partner has got more than an unjust one, but less. Second, in matters relating to the city, where taxes are to be paid, a just man pays more on the same property, an unjust one less. But when the city is giving out refunds, a just man gets nothing, while an unjust one makes a large profit. Finally, when each of them holds a ruling position in some public office, a just person, even if he isn't penalized in other ways, finds that his private affairs deteriorate because he has to neglect them. But he has no advantage from the public purse because of his justice, and that he's hated by his relatives and acquaintances when he's unwilling to do them an unjust favor. The opposite is true of an unjust man in every respect. Therefore, I repeat what I said before, a person of great power outdoes everyone else. Consider him if you want to figure out how much more advantageous it is for the individual to be just rather than unjust. You understand this most easily if you turn your thoughts to the most complete injustice, the one that makes the doer of injustice happiest and the sufferers of it, and who are unwilling to do injustice, most wretched. This is tyranny, which through stealth or force appropriates the property of others, whether sacred or profane, public or private, not little by little, but all at once. If someone commits only one part of injustice and is caught, he's punished and greatly reproached. Such party unjustly people are called temple robbers, kidnappers, housebreakers, robbers, and thieves when they commit these crimes. But when someone, in addition to appropriating their possessions, kidnaps and enslaves the citizens as well. Instead of these shameful names, he is called happy and blessed, not only by the citizens themselves, but by all who learn that he has done the whole of injustice. Those who reproach injustice do so because they are afraid not doing it, but of suffering it. So, Socrates, injustice, if it is on a large enough scale, is stronger, freer, and more masterly than justice. And as I said from the first, justice is what is advantageous to the stronger, while injustice is to one's own profit and advantage. Having emptied this great flood of words into our ears all at once like a bath attendant, Thrasymachus intended to leave. But those present didn't let him and made him stay to give an account of what he had said. I too begged him to say, and I said to him, after hurling such a speech at us, Thrasymachus, do you intend to leave before adequately instructing us to finding out whether you were right or not? Or do you think it a small matter to determine which whole way of life would make the living most worthwhile for each of us? Is that what you seem to think? Thrasymachus said. Either that or else you care nothing for us and aren't worried about whether we'll live better or worse lives because of our ignorance of what you say you know. Some show willingness to teach it to us. It wouldn't be a bad investment for you to be the benefactor of a group as large as ours. For my own part, I tell you that I am not persuaded. I don't believe that injustice is more profitable than justice, not even if you give it full scope and put no obstacles in its way. Suppose that there is an unjust person, and suppose he does have the power to do injustice, whether by trickery or open warfare. Nonetheless, he doesn't persuade me that injustice is more profitable than justice. Perhaps someone here, besides myself, feels the same as I do. So come now and persuade us that we are wrong to esteem justice more highly than injustice in planning our lives. And how am I to persuade you if you aren't persuaded by what I said just now? What more can I do? Am I to take my argument and pour it into your very soul? God forbid, don't do that. But first, stick to what you said, and then, if you change your position, do it openly and don't deceive us. You see, Thrasymachus, that having to find the true doctor to continue examining things you said before, you didn't consider it necessary later to keep a precise guard on the true shepherd. You think that, insofar as he is a shepherd, he fattens sheep, not looking to what is best for the sheep, but to a banquet, like a guest about to be entertained at a feast, or to a future sale. Like a money-maker rather than a shepherd. Shepherding is concerned only to provide what is best for the things it is set over, and it is self-adequately provided with all it needs to be at its best when it doesn't fall short in any way of being the craft of shepherding. That's why I thought it necessary for us to agree before that every kind of rule, insofar as it rules, doesn't seek anything other than what is best for the thing it rules and cares for, and that this is true both of public and private kinds of rule. But you think that those who rule cities, the true rulers, rule willingly? I don't think it, by God. I know it. But, Thrasymachus, don't you realize that in other kinds of rule, no one wants to rule for his own sake, but they ask for pay, thinking that the ruling will benefit not themselves, but their subjects? Tell me, doesn't every craft differ from every other in having a different function? Please don't answer contrary to what you believe, so that we may come to some definite conclusion. Yes, that's what differentiates them. And each craft benefits us in its own peculiar way, different from the others. For example, medicine gives us health, navigation gives us safety while sailing, and so with the others? Certainly. And wage earning gives us wages, for this is its function. Or would you call medicine the same as navigation? Indeed, if you want to define matters precisely, as you proposed, even if someone who is a ship's captain becomes healthy because sailing is advantageous to his health, you wouldn't for that reason call his craft medicine. Certainly not. Nor would you call wage earning medicine, even if someone becomes healthy while earning wages. Certainly not. Nor would you call medicine wage earning, even if someone earns pay while healing. No, we are agreed then that the craft brings its own peculiar benefit. It does. Then whatever benefit all craftsmen receive in common must clearly result from their joint practice of some additional craft that benefits each of them. So it seems. And we say that the additional craft in question, which benefits the craftsmen by earning them wages, is the craft of wage earning. He reluctantly agreed. Then this benefit, receiving wages, doesn't result from their own craft, but rather, if we were to examine this precisely, medicine provides health and wage earning provides wages. House building provides a house, and wage earning, which accompanies it, provides a wage, and so on with the other crafts. Each of them does its own work and benefits the things it is set over. So, if wages aren't added, is there any benefit that the craftsman gets from his craft? Apparently none. But he still provides a benefit when he works for nothing? Yes, I think he does. Then it is clear now, Thrasymachus, that no craft or rule provides for its own advantage, but, as we've been saying for some time, it provides and orders for its subject and aims at its advantage, that of the weaker, not of the stronger. That's why I just said now, Thrasymachus, that no one willingly chooses to rule and take other people's troubles in hand and straighten them out, but each asks for wages. For anyone who intends to practice his craft well never does or orders what is best for himself, at least not when he orders it his craft prescribes, but what is best for his subject. It is because of this, it seems, that wages must be provided to a person if he's willing to rule, whether in the form of money or honor, if a penalty if he refuses. What do you mean, Socrates? Said Glaucon. I know the first two kinds of wages, but I don't understand what penalty you mean or how you can call it a wage. Then you don't understand the best people's kinds of wages, the kind that moves the most decent to rule when they are willing to rule at all. Don't you know that the love of honor and the love of money are despised, and rightly so? I do. Therefore, good people won't be willing to rule for the sake of either money or honor. They don't want to be paid wages openly for ruling and getting called hired hands, nor to take them in secret from the rule and be called thieves. And they won't rule for the sake of honor because they aren't ambitious honor lovers. So, if they're to be willing to rule, some compulsion or punishment must be brought to bear on them. Perhaps that's why it is thought shameful to seek to rule before one is compelled to. Now, the greatest punishment, if one isn't willing to rule, is to be ruled by someone worse than oneself. And I think that it's fear of this that makes decent people rule when they do. They approach ruling not as something good or something to be enjoyed, but as something necessary, since it can't be entrusted to anyone better than, or even as good as, themselves. In a city of good men, if it came into being, the citizens would fight in order not to rule, just as they do now in order to rule. There it would be quite clear that anyone who is really a true ruler doesn't by nature seek his own advantage, but that of his subjects. And everyone, knowing this, would rather be benefited by others than take the trouble to benefit them. So I can't at all agree with Thrasymachus that justice is the advantage of the stronger, but we'll look further into that another time. What Thrasymachus is now saying, that the life of an unjust person is better than that of a just one, seems to be of far greater importance. What life would you choose, Glaucon? And which of our views do you consider truer? I certainly think the life of a just person is more profitable. Did you hear all the things Thrasymachus listed a moment ago for the unjust life? I heard, but I wasn't persuaded. Then do you want to persuade him if we're able to find a way that what he says isn't true? Of course I do. If we suppose with a parallel speech about the blessings of the just life, and then he replies, and then we do, we'd have to count and measure the good things mentioned on each side, and we need a jury to decide the case. But if, on the other hand, we investigate the question, as we've been doing, by seeking agreement with each other, we ourselves can't be both jury and advocates at once. Certainly. Which approach do you prefer, I asked. The second. Come then, Thrasymachus, I said. Answer us from the beginning. You say that complete injustice is more profitable than complete justice. I certainly do say that, and I've told you why. Well then, what do you say about this? Do you call one of the two a virtue and the other a vice? Of course. That is to say, you call justice a virtue, and injustice a vice. That's hardly likely, since I say that injustice is profitable and justice isn't. Then, what exactly do you say? The opposite. That justice is a vice? No, just very high-minded simplicity. Then, what do you call being unjust, being low-minded? No, I call it good judgment. You consider unjust people then, Thrasymachus, to be clever and good? Yes, those who are completely unjust, who can bring cities and whole communities under their power. Perhaps you think I meant pickpockets. Not that such crimes aren't also profitable, but if they're not found out, but they aren't worth merchanting by comparison to what I'm talking about. I'm not aware of what you want to say, but I wonder about this. Do you really include injustice with virtue and wisdom, and justice with their opposites? I certainly do. That's harder, and it isn't easy to know what to say. If you had declared that justice is more profitable, but agreed that it is a vice or shameful, as some others do, we could have discussed the matter on the basis of conventional beliefs. But now, obviously, you'll say that injustice is fine and strong and apply it to all the attributes we used to apply to justice, since you dare to include it with virtue and wisdom. You've divined my views exactly. Nonetheless, we mustn't shrink from pursuing the argument and look into this, just as long as I take you to be saying what you really think, and to believe that you are not joking now, Thrasymachus, but are saying what you believe to be the truth. What difference does it make to you whether I believe it or not? It's my account you're supposed to be refuting. It makes no difference. But try to answer this further question. Do you think that a just person wants to outdo someone else who's just? Not for all, for he wouldn't then be as polite and innocent as he is. Or to outdo someone who does a just action. No, he doesn't want to do that. And does he claim that he deserves to outdo an unjust person and believe that it's just for him to do so? Or doesn't he believe that? He'd want to outdo him, and he'd claim to deserve to do so, but he wouldn't be able. That's not what I asked, but whether a just person wants to outdo an unjust person, but not a just one, thinking that this is what he deserves? He does. What about an unjust person? Does he claim that he deserves to outdo a just person or someone who does a just action? Of course he does. He thinks he deserves to outdo everyone. There will be an unjust person also outdo an unjust person or someone who does an unjust action, and will he strive to get the most he can for himself from everyone else? He will. Then let's put it this way. A just person doesn't outdo someone like himself, but someone unlike himself, whereas an unjust person outdoes both like and unlike. Very well put. An unjust person is clever and good, a just one is neither. That's well put too. It follows then that an unjust person is like clever and good people while the other isn't. Of course that's so. How could he fail to be like them when he has their qualities? While the other isn't like them. Fine, then each of us has the qualities of the people he's like. Of course. All right, Thrasymachus, do you call one person musical and another non-musical? Which of them is clever in music and which isn't? The musical one is clever, of course, and the other isn't. And the things he's clever in, he's good in, and the things he isn't clever in, he's bad in? Yes. Isn't that the same true of a doctor? It is. Do you think a musician, in turning his lyre and in tightening and loosening the strings, wants to outdo another musician, claiming that this is what he deserves? I do not. But he does want to outdo a non-musician. Necessarily. What about a doctor? Does he, when prescribing food and drink, want to outdo another doctor or someone who does the action that medicine prescribes? Certainly not. But he does want to outdo a non-doctor. Yes. In any branch of knowledge or ignorance, do you think that a knowledgeable person would intentionally try to outdo other knowledgeable people or say something better or different than they do, rather than doing or saying the same thing as those like him? Well, perhaps must be as you say. And what about an ignorant person? Does he want to outdo both a knowledgeable person and an ignorant one? Probably. A knowledgeable person is clever? I agree. And a clever one is good? I agree. Therefore, a good and clever person doesn't want to outdo those like himself, but those who are unlike him and his opposite. So it seems. But a bad and ignorant person wants to outdo both his like and his opposite. Apparently. Now, Thrasymachus, we found that an unjust person tries to outdo those like him and those unlike him. Didn't you say that? I did. And that a just person won't undo his like, but his unlike. Yes. Then a just person is like a clever and good one, and an unjust is like an ignorant and bad one. It looks that way. Moreover, we agree that each has the qualities of the one he resembles. Yes, he did. Then, a just person has turned out to be good and clever, and an unjust one ignorant and bad. Thrasymachus agreed to all this, not easily as I'm telling it, but reluctantly, with toil, trouble, and since it was summer, a quantity of sweat that was a wonder to behold. And then I saw something that I'd never seen before. Thrasymachus blushing. But, in any case, after we'd agreed that justice is virtue and wisdom, and that injustice is vice and ignorance, I said, all right, let's take that as established. But also, we also said that injustice is powerful, or don't you remember that, Thrasymachus? I remember, but I'm not satisfied with what you're now saying. I could make a speech about it, but if I did, I know that you'd accuse me of engaging in oratory. So either allow me to speak, or, if you want to ask questions, go ahead, and I'll say, all right, and nod yes and no, as one does to old wives' tales. Don't do that, contrary to your own opinion. I'll answer so as to please you, since you won't let me make a speech. What else do you want? Nothing, by God. But it's that what you're going to do, go ahead and do it. I'll ask my questions. Ask ahead. I'll ask what I asked before, so we may proceed with our argument about justice and injustice in an orderly fashion. For surely it was claimed that injustice is stronger and more powerful than justice. But now, if justice is indeed wisdom and virtue, it will easily be shown to be stronger than injustice. Since injustice is ignorance, no one could now be ignorant of that. However, I don't want to state the matter so unconditionally, Thrasymachus, but to look into it in some way such as this. Would you say that it is unjust for a city to try to enslave other cities unjustly and to hold them in subjugation when it has enslaved many of them? Of course, that's what the best city will especially do, the one that is most completely unjust. I understand that's the position, but the point I want to examine is this. Will the city that becomes stronger than any other achieve this power without justice, or will it need the help of justice? If what you said a moment ago stands, and justice is cleverness or wisdom, it will need the help of justice. But if things are as I stated, it will need the help of injustice. I'm impressed, Thrasymachus, that you don't merely nod yes or no, but give very fine answers. That's because I'm trying to please you. You're doing it very well at it, too. So please me some more by answering this question. Do you think that a city, an army, a band of robbers or thieves, or any other tribe with a common unjust purpose would be able to achieve it if they were unjust to each other? No, indeed. What if they weren't unjust to one another? Would they achieve more? Certainly. Injustice, Thrasymachus, causes civil war, hatred, and fighting amongst themselves, while justice brings friendship and a sense of common purpose. Isn't that so? Let it be so, in order not to disagree with you. You're still doing well on that front, so tell me this. If the effect of injustice is to produce hatred wherever it occurs, then, whenever it arises, whether among freemen or slaves, won't it cause them to hate one another, engage in civil war, and prevent them from achieving any common purpose? Certainly. What if it arises between two people? Won't they be at odds, hate each other, and be enemies to one another and to just people? They will. Does injustice lose its power to cause dissension when it arises within a single individual, or will it preserve it intact? Let it preserve it intact. Apparently, then, injustice has the power, first, to make whatever it arises in, whether it is a city, a family, an army, or anything else, incapable of achieving anything as a unit, but because of the civil wars and differences it creates, and second, it makes that unit an enemy to itself and to what is in every way its opposite, namely justice. Isn't that so? Certainly. And even in a single individual, it has by its nature the very same effect. First, if it makes him incapable of achieving anything, because he is in a state of civil war and not of one mind. Second, it makes him his own enemy as well as the enemy of just people. Hasn't it that effect? Yes. And the gods are too just? Let it be so. So an unjust person is also an enemy of the gods, Thrasymachus, while a just person is their friend. Enjoy your banquet of words. Have no fear. I won't oppose you. That would make these people hate me. Come then. Complete the banquet for me by continuing to answer as you've been doing. We have shown that just people are cleverer and more capable of doing things, while unjust ones aren't even able to act together. For when we speak of a powerful achievement by unjust men acting together, whatever we say isn't altogether true. They would never have been able to keep their hands off each other even if they were completely unjust. But clearly, there must have been some sort of justice in them that at least prevented them from doing injustice among themselves at the same time as they were doing it to others. And it was this that enabled them to achieve what they did. When they started doing unjust things, they were only halfway corrupted by their injustice. For those who are all bad and completely unjust are completely incapable of accomplishing anything. These are the things I understand to hold, not the ones you first maintained. We must now examine, as we proposed before, whether just people are also live better and are happier than unjust ones. I think it's clear already that this is so, but we must look into it further, since the argument concerns no ordinary topic, but the way we ought to live. Go ahead and look. I will. Tell me, do you think there is such a thing as the function of a horse? I do. And would you define the function of a horse or of anything else as that which one can only do with it or best with it? I don't understand. Let me put it this way. Is it possible to see with anything other than eyes? Certainly not. Or to hear with anything other than ears? No. Then we are right to say that seeing and hearing are the functions of eyes and ears. Of course. What about this? Could you use a dagger or a carving knife or lots of other things in pruning a vine? Of course. But you wouldn't do a finer job with a pruning knife designed for the purpose than with anything else. You would. Then shall we take pruning to be its function? Yes. Now I think you'll understand what I was asking earlier when I asked whether the function of each thing is what it alone can do, or whether it does better than anything else. I understand, and I think this is the function of each. All right, does each thing to which a particular function is assigned also have a virtue? Let's go over the same ground again. We say that eyes have some function. They do. So is there also a virtue of eyes? There is. And ears have a function. Yes. So there's also a virtue of ears. There is. And all other things are the same, aren't they? They are. And could eyes perform their function well if they lacked their particular virtue and had the vice instead? How could they? For don't you mean if they had blindness instead of sight? Whatever their virtue is, I'm asking now about that, but I'm not now asking about that, but about whether anything that has a function performs it well by means of its own peculiar virtue and badly by means of its vice. That's true, it does. So, ears too, deprived of their own virtue, perform their function badly. That's right. And the same could be said about everything else, so it seems. Come then, let's consider this. Is there some function of a soul that you couldn't perform with anything else? For example, taking care of things, ruling, deliberating, and the like. Is there anything other than a soul to which you could rightly assign these and say that they are its peculiar function? No, none of them. What of living? Isn't that a function of a soul? It certainly is. And don't we also say that there is a virtue of the soul? We do. Then, will the soul ever perform its function well, Thrasymachus, if it is deprived of its own peculiar virtue? Or is that impossible? It's impossible. Doesn't it follow, then, that a bad soul rules and takes care of things badly, and that a good soul does all these things well? It does. Now, we agree that justice is a soul's virtue, and injustice its vice. We did. Then it follows that a just soul and a just man will live well, and an unjust one badly. Apparently so, according to your argument. And surely anyone who lives well is blessed and happy, and anyone who doesn't is the opposite, of course. Therefore, a just person is happy, and an unjust one wretched. So be it. It profits no one to be wretched, but to be happy, of course. And so, Thrasymachus, injustice is never more profitable than justice. Let that be your banquet, Socrates, at the feast of Bendis. Given by you, Thrasymachus, after you became gentle and ceased to give me rough treatment. Yet I haven't had a fine banquet, but that's my fault, not yours. I seem to have behaved like a glutton, snatching at every dish that passes and tasting it before properly savoring its predecessor. Before finding the answer to our first inquiry about what justice is, I let that go and turned to investigate whether it is a kind of vice and ignorance or a kind of wisdom and virtue. Then an argument came up about injustice being more profitable than justice, and I couldn't refrain from abandoning the previous one and following up on that. Hence the result of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned, is that I know nothing. For when I don't know what justice is, I hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not, or whether a person who has it is happy or unhappy.